Although dead to a lot of people, PlayNow mode is a large part of 2K and has been since the start, and started adding historic teams in NBA 2K11. Since then, there have been a variety of teams added, but there still remains some that need to be added into the game. The first team that should be added in is the 1980-1981 Boston Celtics. This was the end of the Dave Cowens, JoJo White era and the beginning of the Bird Mikhail Parrish era. Nate Archibald is making a comeback by not only winning games, but winning his first and the dynasty's first NBA championship. I would really like to see any team with Tiny added, but this one I feel will be the most popular because they did win 62 games and none of the other teams he played for made it this far. The ratings would obviously be quite different from the 85-86 team that is already in 2K just because the big three is super young and they had some solid veterans instead of the all-star backcourt they had in 86. The second team I feel should be added, and most of y'all probably do too, is the 1994-1995 Indiana Pacers. 2K is yet to add Reggie Miller into the game, and adding this team would be a good excuse to get rights for him. Any of the Pacers teams would be good, however this one just made it the furthest in the playoffs along with the 1997-1998 Pacers. This team included players like Dale Davis, Derek McKee, Rick Smits, Mark Jackson, Antonio Davis, Byron Scott, Sam Mitchell, and LaSalle Thompson. Charles Barkley is another player that needs to be added to the game as obviously he's one of the greatest power forwards to ever play. With that in mind, the 1992-1993 Phoenix Suns would be a dandy addition to the historic teams as they finished with 62 wins, the most in the league, ahead of the Bulls, the Jazz, and the Rockets. Not only that, but Charles Barkley also won the MVP that year and was supported by Dan Marley, Kevin Johnson, Richard Dumas, Tom Chambers, Danny Ainge, Cedric Ceballos, Mark West, and an old Kurt Rambis. So although this wouldn't be the greatest team in PlayNow by any means, it would be fun having a team featuring prime Charles Barkley, especially if they fix the height problem by 2K20. Next up is the second coming of Lob City, the 2013-2014 Los Angeles Clippers. The team went 57-25 while featuring the big three of prime Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan. Of course, they also had JJ Redick and Jamal Crawford with some key role players in Matt Barnes, Darren Collison, Jared Dudley, Danny Granger, Hito Turkoglu, and Reggie Bullock. Not only would this team be immensely fun to play with, but it's also a known team by most of the younger fans, which we all know 2K is predominantly comprised of. The biggest positive to adding this team though is that 2K already owns the rights to so many of the players. They wouldn't have to pay anyone or seek out permission from any of the players because A, most of them still play today, and B, the players that don't still play, 2K owns the rights to. Next up is the 1996-1997 Miami Heat. A lot of people don't know that the Heat had any good teams before the thousands, however the team led by Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway, and Jamal Mashburn went 61-21 and lost in the conference finals to the Chicago Bulls in the playoffs. Now for a slightly older team, the 1976-1977 Washington Bullets. The main reason I added this team is because the Wizards franchise is the only one without a historic team, so a lot of the Wizards fans, if they have any right now, are probably feeling left out when it comes to PlayNow. This is more than a solid team though, as they went 48-34 with a core of Elvin Hayes, Wes Unseld, Truck Robinson, Dave Bing, Phil Chenier, Tom Henderson, and Mitch Kupchak. It's quite a shame none of these players' primes overlapped. Nevertheless, this team could be a good addition to the historic teams in PlayNow. Speaking of the devil, we have the 1968-1969 Baltimore Bullets. This team is much improved from the last as they outwin Russell's Celtics, Wilt's Sixers, and Baylor and West's Lakers, claiming the first seed in the league. This team comprised of a rookie Wes Unseld, Kevin Lowry, Earl Monroe, Gus Johnson, Jack Marin, Ray Scott, and Leroy Ellis. Sadly, this team got matched up against the stacked Knicks team in the first round, so they obviously didn't make it far in the playoffs. However, the star power this team has is quite outstanding and would be a very fun team to play with in 2K. Gus Johnson is a player I'd really enjoy seeing in 2K simply because if you don't know him or his playstyle, he's basically a poor man's Dr. J. He's one of the most athletic players in the league in an era where most of the most athletic players came from and could dunk like there was no tomorrow. He could and he would dunk over anyone you can imagine, including Wilt Chamberlain. If you still don't recognize the name, you might remember the story when a guy dunked over Wilt Chamberlain and proceeded to stare him down, and then the next possession, Wilt dislocated his shoulder, blocking his dunk. Yeah, that was Gus Johnson. So another high flyer like him in 2K would be enjoyable. At number 3 now is the 1959-1960 Boston Celtics. If this team was added, it would be the oldest team out of any of the historic teams, but for good reason. Although Sam Jones hadn't made his big step yet and they hadn't acquired Tom Sanders yet, they had an old Bob Cousy who isn't in play now in the historic teams, and Frank Ramsey, another Hall of Famer. The team also had Tom Heinsohn and a sophomore Casey Jones, two key parts of their dynasty, especially later on. The 1993-1994 Denver Nuggets are a historic team, so why can't the 1984-1985 Denver Nuggets be? In the franchise's debatably biggest stint, the 80s Nuggets teams were the best offensive teams in the league, featuring the 80s leading scorer Alex English and a very old yet still very effective Hall of Famer in Dan Issel. A triple-double machine in Lafayette Lever, T.R. Dunn a defensive stopper, Wayne Cooper a valuable scorer, Bill Hanslick and Danny Shays. This team could be deadly in play now. Any 80s team could be deadly, especially the even earlier ones as they had a better Dan Issel and had Kiki Vandeweghe and David Thompson, although those teams never really lived up to expectations until Fat Lever joined. An earlier Nuggets team would be acceptable as they had David Thompson, Kiki Vandeweghe, and a better Dan Issel, but the later ones they play better. Now finally at number 1, debatably the greatest player to play, Wilt Chamberlain, isn't showcased in his prime at all in play now, and his 1962-1963 season should definitely be put into 2K. Not only would his card be unstoppable since he averaged 50.4 points, 25.7 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and however many fucking shots he blocked that season, but the rest of the team's cards would also be great. The team finished with a 49-31 record, finishing second to the Boston Celtics in the standings. The team had Paul Arizin, one of the best small forwards to play, Tom Gola, a very capable all-around Hall of Famer, and Guy Rogers, one of the best playmakers of all time. Guy Rogers, who most people don't know, is basically the founder of the lob pass. Wilt would get positioned behind whatever big man he was against, and Guy Rogers would throw it up over top of them. Very underrated, and a very big part of their success, and a Hall of Famer. They also had another good point guard in Al Adels, Tom Meshry, a good scoring and rebounding power forward, and then a couple more decent role players. So that is the number 1 team I would like to see in NBA 2K20, or whatever 2K they decide to add more teams in, but let me know in the comments which teams you would like to see in the game, or which teams I left out. So thank you buddies for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.